Hey everyone, Duke here, and I went over all of these Queensfoil Censer artifact mods for Season of the Wish on stream today, but it ended up going kind of much longer than I wanted it to, and so I'm gonna just make like a super brief overview of kind of some of the things I thought, maybe some things that kind of came up during the chats, and thought that might be interesting to watch, so strap in and check it out. So as always, we've got 5 columns of 5 mods here. The first 5 are always kind of our primary stunning mods, nothing too crazy. We've got Overload Pulse Rifle and Overload Auto Rifles. We've got Unstoppable Bow and Unstoppable Hand Cannon. And then we have Anti-Barrier Sidearm. I think Unstops, a couple decent options. Overloads, I think Auto Rifles are pretty good. Pulse, not a super huge fan. I do like Pulse Rifles in general, but I just feel like they're maybe a little weak right now. So probably stick more with Auto Rifles. And again, we do have multiple subclass verb options now as always and as well, so that's going to be super duper nice. Anti-barrier sidearm, not my favorite. Some people may like sidearms, maybe we'll try to build into them some, but I mean, we have Wish Ender, which is top tier anyway, and again, multiple different subclass verbs for barriers as well, so got some decent options, nothing too crazy. For column 2, we've got our kind of seasonal combining siphon mod for Solar Strand and Solar Stasis. We've got Kindling Trigger. Radiant causes solar weapons to apply Scorch to unscorched combatants. This one was definitely one that I think was on the stronger side. I'm pretty excited for this. Again, we have a couple ways to get Radiant in the artifact itself, and of course our normal ways to get Radiant. And just getting damage on enemies with a solar weapon while Radiant is going to be able to Scorch them, gonna create a lot of potential for a lot of Scorch, which then can lead to a lot of Ignites, and we have some other ways to get even more Ignites. A lot of explosions. I like explosions. Got Blast Radius. This is going to give us armor charge with rapid final blows for rocket launchers and grenade launchers. Got a lot of easy ways to do that. Forbearance comes to mind immediately for grenade launchers. We've got some rocket launcher specific mods in the artifact this season, and rockets, if you're going to use them for ad clear, maybe something like Eyes of Tomorrow, which has been buffed a few times recently and is quite good, and is also solar and is also a rocket launcher. Definitely a prime option as a something I definitely want to look into and potentially really get into and use this season. I've really never used Eyes of Tomorrow too much outside of maybe like Gambit, but with some of the buffs, the getting ammo back on 4 kills thing that they added in recently, like, could be pretty big this season. We've got our 2 origin perk specializations. This is going to improve the benefits of a whole bunch of different origin traits. I'm not going to go into all of them here, but honestly for me, usually what this brings most to the table is the fact that these are always overcharged, which means that in any sort of master content that has those overcharged weapons available or overcharged weapons are active, that means any weapon with any of these origin traits listed here is going to be able to get that damage buff, even if it's not the right damage type. So if it's like an Arc Surge weak, but you have a Void weapon, but it has one of these origin traits and you're using one of these, whichever specific, one of these mods you need to be using for your origin trait, that's going to give you your 25% damage buff. And as I've mentioned many times, the overcharge and the weekly surge mods do not stack anyway, so you can use one or the other. It gives some flexibility for sure. And lastly, in column 2, we have From Whence You Came, increases ability damage to Taken and Scorn. If we're fighting Taken and Scorn, it's going to be great. If we're not, obviously useless. I think this is, nothing too crazy. I think we'll definitely want to kind of see how much of a damage buff this gives. But, for supers, for abilities, potentially with your own well, if that is still going to be a thing, or if you can be in your own well and that makes your weapon damage still be ability damage. I know that doesn't work for other people anymore. I believe that last we've seen it still works for your own well, but we'll look into that here in a few short days. Column 3, we have Flint Striker, Rapid Solar Weapon Precision Hits, and Rapid Solar Weapon Final Blows grant Radiant. So again, this is one of the ways that we can get Radiant that I was talking about earlier. Precision Hits on something tankier, rapid kills on weaker enemies, and maybe you've got some kind of AoE things. You got things like Sunshot in there. You got things like, I really like Avalanche with Incandescent. That's already going to be applying Scorch, and then we got more Scorch, and then we got Radiant, and more damage, more explosions. I love it. Now on top of that, while Radiant, dealing increased weapon damage to combatants affected by Strand and Stasis debuffs will be possible with the Torch mod. So again, we're going to maybe need to think a little bit in more of a team aspect here if we want to pair it with some of the other things, but also potentially just, again, this is just while Radiant in any way, and with any sort of weapon damage, as long as they're affected by Strand or Stasis, you have some sort of freeze, maybe like throw a turret out there, or if, Strand, we have unraveling rounds that are going to be pretty easy this season, which we'll talk about here in a second. But it's, not that difficult of something to do to have a combatant affected by strand or stasis. Again, for me, the biggest thing is, will this stack with something like well? I would assume it will, because it's gonna, it has to stack with radiant because it's wall radiant. So I would assume it would also go even higher than well. This depends on how much of a damage buff this is, how difficult it is to really set up. But honestly, this could be pretty damn strong in my opinion. I don't see any world which just doesn't really like stack properly, and I don't feel like it's going to be that crazy difficult to have enemies be affected by it, even just for like, again, thinking boss DPS, or thinking in like more of a GM dungeon, like moving ad clear situation, and maybe there's some like medium to tankier enemies. I think it could be quite useful for that as well. Next, we've got Heart of the Flame. Casting your Solar Super grants nearby allies Radiant, increases the damage of your super for each nearby ally. Going to be useful for team-based content if you're running something solo, or not too many people, or obviously if you're not on a Solar subclass. Going to be completely useless, but if you are on a Solar subclass and you are doing something with a team, probably like a raid, even a dungeon, at least like three-person or six-person activities, that's going to be quite useful, especially on something like Blade Barrage or Golden Gun, which got a couple buffs with some of the exotics coming this season. And also the single shot giant hammer is going to do quite a bit of damage for Solar Titans here as well. And lastly, in this column, we have Wish into Being. While your super is nearly fully charged, ability final blows spawn orbs of power, and wearing Season of the Wish armor decreases super amount threshold. We have that type of thing on this next perk as well. I do like the idea of armor sets or armor bonuses of wearing a certain armor. I feel like seasonal stuff like this is going to be a little bit hard to ask people to grind for unless these things are like really strong. Just to get this armor, like to get re-statted armor for just an individual season, this stuff's gonna have to be really good for that. I feel like something like this is a mod that is useful and is always going to come into play at some point during your playtime. Like obviously when your super is full or your super is not full at all, it's not coming into play there, but in comparison to something like these origin perk specializations, if you're not running any of those types of weapons, or if you're Heart of the Flame, if you're not running Solar Super, obviously those are mods that are completely useless in those cases. This is useful on any subclass, any class, any subclass. Not always, but it is useful at some point during that. Next, we've got Unraveling Orbs. Picking up an Orb of Power will grant strand weapons Unraveling rounds. This is also anti-barrier Unraveling rounds, so this kind of makes strand weapons have some reasonably easy intrinsic anti-barrier, which can add in, again, since we really only have anti-barrier sidearm in here, this could be kind of another way to get anti-barrier with strand weapons, and again, a way to get a debuff for Torch, so interesting mod there for some specific cases for sure. Pillar of Ice, killing an encased combatant spawns stasis crystals. I'm assuming encased, talked about this earlier, I don't feel like I've ever seen the word encased as like a verb, but I'm assuming this means like frozen. Either way, it shouldn't be, I'm assuming it's not going to be too crazy. If it's frozen, that's pretty easy to do. If it's something similar to that, I can't see it being something like crazy difficult to do. Spawning some extra stasis crystals, definitely helpful. Revitalizing Blast, causing damage with a solar ability, weakens champions and bosses for a short duration. This is a great mod, again, obviously only if you're on a solar subclass, but we have a lot of things that are very solar specific. I feel like out of everything solar, it's just still like kind of the season of the solar, even though Strand and Stasis is in here as well. I feel like solar is really the thing getting the most benefits out of this artifact mod, and weakening champions and bosses just for solar abilities, that's very nice. Overload rocket launchers, again, we talked about this on stream today. I'm going to make it as brief as possible. I feel like this is going to be kind of bad. I feel like in certain specific cases I think it could be useful, but overloads, there's a lot of overloads that teleport. A rocket has travel time, or even if you have tracking, it still probably will miss, or at least could very easily miss. And then even on top of that, then you have to think about the fact of it potentially getting unstunned and all of that. Like, it feels awkward. I feel like in certain cases, certain specific overloads, I think it can be okay. And I feel like with certain specific rockets, like I feel like Galley specifically, something with multiple rockets, like Galley or Reconstruction or Bipod or Clown Cartridge, like things like that, I think are going to make this better. I don't know how consistent this will be. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this will be better than I expect. I think it could be useful. Like I'd still have it on if I have a rocket and I have overload, but I still would probably want another way to overload stun with me, whether even if it's maybe not auto or a pulse, at least like a subclass verb to go along with this. I feel like just the rocket alone would scare me a little bit, just as the single overload option. And finally, we have Dragon's Bite. Breaking a combatant's shield with a strand or stasis weapon has the chance to suspend or freeze that combatant. Again, we have this wearing Season of the Wish armor makes it better. This is, again, there's not that many shields in most parts of the game. Strand and stasis weapons specifically, I feel like there's less of those in general. And, you know, there's some good ones, but less of those. And there's only a chance to do this. And it only suspends or freezes that combatant. Which, once I've broken the shield, I probably, in a lot of cases, have either almost killed it, or, you know, maybe I'm already killing it, or maybe it's already dead. Like, again, I feel like this is something we'll maybe have to look at in actual gameplay to get a better feel for, but just in braining it, you know, just thinking about it, it doesn't seem very good, personally. Again, I could see, you know, if there's something with if something new comes in, the new dungeon has a ton of shields, and, you know, the shields are easy to break, but the enemies are super tanky, or something like that, then, you know, very much maybe. But, or I mean, in that case, I'd say, you know, possibly very good. But it's going to be very specific. Like, it's going to need a very specific situation. I don't feel like right now there is something I can really come up with off the top of my head that's going to, like, feel like this is all that useful. And finally, of the final column, damaging unraveled targets with a weapon occasionally spawns a threadling. That's going to go pretty well with the unraveling orbs here. Obviously, you're going to unravel the target with it, and you can spawn some extra threadlings. Nice little bonus combo. I feel like unless you're running this, you're probably not running this. You know, kind of run them both together. Hail of Storm, shattering encased targets and stasis crystals deal increased damage. Shattering a stasis crystal releases shards of ice that damage and slow targets. That's going to, again, kind of go nicely with Pillar of Ice and nicely with stasis subclasses in general. I think on top of some of the stasis buffs we're getting this season, which are reasonably small, I would say, and we're supposed to get more later, I do think these mods will definitely be helpful. And if we do get the additional stasis buffs that they have talked about during this season still, I think that could definitely be something to then relook into as well. But again, obviously kind of need to be focusing stasis for this. Next, we got Rays of Precision. While Radiant Solar Precision Final Blows cause combatants to ignite, again, even more explosions. We like explosions, while Radiant, again, we've got other things that cause Radiant and do things while Radiant, and now we can also ignite enemies while Radiant, as long as we're getting Precision Final Blows, just even more explosions. I like it. Again, obviously requires you to have a way to get Radiant, and obviously also requires you to be running solar weapons. So, specific use case, but in that use case, I think it's quite good. So Operative is back. We love that. While you are the only member of your fire team, you deal increased damage to all combatants. This was 15% damage, I believe, last time it came out, and I assume it'll probably be the same. We'll test it out as soon as we can and make sure we know that for sure. But obviously, super easy mod. If you're running solo, use it. It's free. It's literally every single enemy in the entire thing, you know, solo dungeons, solo lost sectors, whatever else. If you're doing it solo, use this mod. If you're not solo, it's completely useless. So easy mod to choose, and when to choose it and when not to choose it. Argent Ordnance is our final mod. Firing a rocket launcher consumes 1 stack of armor charge, granting increased damage and reload speed until you reload or stow your rocket launcher. This is a mod that used to be a charge with light mod. It used to not stack with well, so I'm interested to see if that's going to be a thing, because if it does stack with well, and rockets are definitely quite good damage in general for a lot of boss DPS situations, that's going to just give us extra damage and extra reloads for it, which is insanely good. Even if it doesn't stack with well, again, I think it could be useful for more of like a roaming situation, like roaming GM dungeons, ad cleary things. Again, Eyes of Tomorrow coming back into play again with something like this. I feel like definitely going to have uses. It's going to either be very good or insanely busted. I think I think those are the only two options really. Obviously, again, if you're not using a rocket, it doesn't do anything. But I think rockets are pretty solid in general. The one downside of most situations when you're using a rocket, for me at least, when we're using a rocket that's not just boss DPS, can be ammo economy. But there's ways to get around that. We don't have any like heavy ammo maker this season, but again, we have like Aeons and stuff like that, or the Anvil helmet, as I love for Warlock with trace rifles. But so we got some different ways to make heavy to keep that up. Again, Eyes of Tomorrow can make its own heavy if you are getting enough kills with it. So worst case, I think it's going to be at least very good. If it does stack with well, it's just free for DPS phases and insanely strong. And that's all for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this breakdown to the mods in Season of the Wish. It still ended up being kind of a bit longer than I wanted, but at least a little bit less fluff than we had on stream. As always, thank you so much for watching, and have a wonderful day.